Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "If someone has on his skin a scab or pustule or blotch, which appears to be the sore of leprosy, he shall be brought to Aaron the priest or to one of the priests among his descendants. If the man is leprous and unclean, the priest shall declare him unclean by reason of the sore on his head. The one who bears the sore of leprosy shall keep his garments rent and his head bare, and shall muffle his beard. He shall cry out, 'Unclean, unclean.' As long as the sore is on him, he shall declare himself unclean, since he is in fact unclean. He shall dwell apart, making his abode outside the camp." The word of the Lord.
A reading from the first letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians. Brothers and sisters, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do everything for the glory of God. Avoid giving offense, whether to the Jews or Greeks or the Church of God, just as I try to please everyone in every way, not seeking my own benefit, but that of the many, that they may be saved. Be imitators of me, as I am of Christ. The word of the Lord.
Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
A leper came to Jesus and kneeling down begged him and said, "If you wish, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand, touched him, and said to him, "I do will it. Be made clean." The leprosy left him immediately, and he was made clean. Then, warning him sternly, he dismissed him at once. He said to him, "See that you tell no one anything, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses prescribed. That will be proof for them." The man went away and began to publicize the whole matter. He spread the report abroad, so that it was impossible for Jesus to enter a town openly. He remained outside in deserted places, and people kept coming to him from everywhere. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I ask our RCIA candidates for the Easter sacraments to please stand. Father Paul, as Easter draws near, these candidates have entered into their final preparation and purification leading to the Easter sacraments. They have found strength in God's grace and support in our community's prayer and example. Now they desire to receive from our community our blessing to go forward to the rite of election and call to continuing conversion, to be celebrated with Bishop Earl Boyer for all the parishes of our region at St. John in Davison next Saturday afternoon.
Do you know if they are truly sincere in their desire to be joined with us in the death and resurrection of Christ through the Easter sacraments?
Father, you and I have met with these candidates and have heard the testimony of their sponsors. I believe that they have taken their formation seriously, that their lives give evidence that they have taken our Catholic way of life to heart, and that they have truly tried to shape their lives by the gospel. Please be seated.
Well, good morning. You know, our first reading and our gospel, it talks a lot about leprosy. And sometimes I think that can be hard to identify with, right? At least I don't deal with leprosy very often. Maybe you do, but it's not something that is kind of imminent in my life, and so it can be hard to kind of actually figure out what's going on there and why these things are so important. And so I want to go all the way back to that first reading and talk a little bit about what's going on there. So what's happening in that gospel, or not gospel, in that reading, is these instructions as to what should happen when a person contracts leprosy, and they show themselves to the priest, and they're then declared unclean, and they're like ostracized from the community. And that happens for two reasons. The first reason they're ostracized from the community is that leprosy was incredibly deadly and incredibly contagious. Right? It was a way of kind of quarantining that individual so that they wouldn't infect the entire community, have like this plague kind of break out through the community. And so that was the first reason. It was kind of this practical reason. But there was also a spiritual reason that they acted that way. And it was seen that those sores of leprosy made them not just like in body disease, but almost in soul diseased. And they were considered unclean to the point where if they actually came in contact with somebody who didn't have leprosy, even if they didn't then contract leprosy, that person was diseased as well. And they would have to go through these kinds of washings and purification rites in order to be kind of reinstated into the life of grace and kind of be reinstated into the covenant that the Lord had made with his people. And so there are these two reasons why the leper is kind of cast out, right? And they have to kind of make themselves known as being unclean. Again, not only because of that physical disease, but because they're seen as like spiritually sick. And that spiritual sickness was just as dangerous in the eyes of the Jewish people as the physical sickness was. And so here enters Jesus. And Jesus is doing something exceptionally odd. Right? Because there's this man with leprosy who's the outcast, right? He's the exile. He's the quarantined one. And instead of like distancing himself, right, this leper comes close to Jesus and he says, "Lord, if you wish, you can make me clean." And Jesus does something unthinkable at this moment. He says, "I do will it. Be made clean." And Jesus reaches out and touches the leper. That action should never happen, according to the Jewish rites, right? Because what that action does is it should have made Jesus diseased. But what ends up happening is the opposite. Instead of Jesus being infected, this man is now cleansed. And what Jesus is trying to show is that he's doing something new. He's doing something different. And he's taking that old covenant of kind of sickness and disease and that being the thing that spreads through the community, and he's flipping it on its head by saying that being in contact with me, it doesn't matter how spiritually sick you are, because my cleanliness, my purity, my holiness, my wellness, my healing, that's what spreads. It's not the disease, it's not the sickness, it's not the brokenness, it's Jesus. It's that life of grace, that life of God. This new covenant that Jesus is ushering in, that he's starting to show as he does all of these things. And this is in part why people are so scandalized by the ministry of Christ. Right? He should be unclean when he touches and heals the leper. He should be unclean when he goes into the house of these sinners and he dines with them. He should be ritually unclean as he violates the Sabbath and he does all of these things on the Sabbath that Jews aren't supposed to do. Right? And people are scandalized by these things because these are the things that are supposed to separate him from that covenant of God. But it doesn't. In fact, it's doing the opposite. Instead of making him unclean, it's going into all these places and cleansing them of that spiritual malady that exists. And so, brothers and sisters, what spiritual sickness do you have? Because I tell you, I've heard it in a lot of different places. At the high school, as a chaplain, I've heard it here in my office. I've heard it just chatting with people at Meyer, right? People are constantly wondering, is this thing that I've got too big for Jesus? Is this thing that's happened, whether it's my own personal sin or something that was that happened to me, is this brokenness that I experienced, is this too much? Can God actually forgive this? Can God actually heal this? Can God actually do something with this? And I want to tell you, if God can only deal with the things that are small and insignificant, it makes him very small and very insignificant. But that's the best part, is that he can deal with these things that are huge and important because he is huge and important. In fact, his mercy and his love is infinite. And I guarantee you that whatever spiritual sickness you have, Jesus is not repulsed. He's not afraid. And he's willing to go out and touch that sore of leprosy, whatever it might be. Because it's not your brokenness, it's not your uncleanness, it's not your stuff that infects him. Right? But it works the other way. As he comes into that spot, right, what happens is that he brings his wholeness and his healing and his wellness. Now, what he's waiting for is the same action that leper took. Because Jesus wasn't the first actor, right? What happened at first is the leper approaches Jesus and he says, "Lord, if you will, you can make me clean." And what he's doing is he's inviting Jesus in this act of faith. He's inviting Jesus into that place of uncleanness. And that's all Jesus is really waiting for, is an act of faith. An act of invitation on our part to enter into some of those places of ugliness, some of those places of grossness. Right? Because again, he's not repulsed by these things, but he's not going to force himself upon us. Right? He's not going to deal with the things that we don't want him to deal with. And so, brothers and sisters, I think it's worth asking the question, not only, maybe before we even get into that, I'm going to spoil the suspense for you. Wherever you are in your spiritual life, I'm very confident you've not yet reached perfection. Right? I'm just going to say that just for everybody's benefit. Right? Which means that there are these places within us where the Lord can still be at work. Which is very exciting. Because it means that the Lord isn't done with us. It means that the Lord doesn't just want to leave us to our own whims anymore, right? It means that the Lord wants to be intimately involved in these aspects of our lives. And so let's spend that moment considering what it is in our hearts that still needs that healing, that still needs that presence, that still needs that healing touch. And then in faith and courage, let's be like that same guy and come to the Lord who's going to be present here at this altar and say to him, "Lord, if you will, you can make me clean." Because I guarantee you, no matter what is going on there, no matter how big or how impressive you think your brokenness is, I guarantee you, it's not too much for him.